We spent the last several months building a program for young cultural entrepreneurs and selecting the first cohort of 50 fellows. Basically, it's been an amazing cross-section of leaders working at this intersection of community and culture. And it's a little bit different from what we're used to seeing. So normally we deal with traditional mid-sized arts and culture organizations, and these folks are certainly working outside of that. And I think we would all agree that we've learned a lot from this, and we wanted to share that experience with you.
It was amazing watching the recruitment process and how energized and enlivened this whole office was. It was a different tone than it normally is, and we're so lucky that in many of our programs we get to work with some of the best minds in the cultural fields, and people who are really change makers and doing great things. But I think we can all agree that there was something different about this process, and I think it was the overall sense of optimism that came from the applicants and their work, which is just so inspiring. It also inspired us, and I think that's why we wanted to have this conversation and share it, just to spread that sense of optimism and let everybody know that it's there in the field.
To build on one thing you said, Sunny, that I found in all of the groups, in all of the individuals as well, was that energy, and certainly a lot of that comes with where they are in their career perhaps, and you get a few battle scars as you spend more time in the field. But in addition to the energy, excitement that they brought to all of their projects, one of the things that I was frankly electrified by was the almost near absence of labels that people seem to bring to their work. Some were in traditional arts organizations, some were outside, working as cultural entrepreneurs, as Dallas said, and not necessarily attached to an organization, maybe working on a project basis, maybe just coming up with their first project. But a lot of the terms that we, as an organization and as a field, we get stuck on taxonomies of not-for-profit or for-profit or an organizational hierarchy and these things, am I a visionary, am I a creative placemaker? These people were just really jazzed about what they were doing, and they went out and did it. And sometimes they'll figure out the funding later, and they'll figure out if that's going to be a formal organization later. But they've come up with these things, and they've gone out and done them. And I think they seem less concerned about what they're going to call themselves yet or label them. And there's plenty of time for that later. But that's one of the things that I found so refreshing and exciting about this group.
I found it really interesting too that a lot of them didn't identify themselves, like you say, as part of the field or as part of arts and culture or a part of administrators, whatever. I think a lot of them, though, said that they were a little isolated by the work. They were definitely hungry for some kind of community. And we often hear from the leaders that we work with who are running large institutions and mid-sized institutions that they're also isolated, but it was a very different feeling. It was a kind of an odd thing to think about the kind of innovation that these folks are doing, and it was struck by a video that I watched several years ago, Yvonne Chouinard, who's the founder of Patagonia, talking about the idea that innovators and the people who come up with the ideas are essentially rebellious teenagers at heart, right? They don't fit in, and that kind of not fitting in helps drive them and helps them come up with ideas. And we certainly know from kind of frameworks that we teach that innovation comes from the edges, right? It's not from the middle of the bell curve, it's from the outside. And I couldn't help but, as I was listening to these people who were very passionate and had these really interesting ideas, do we listen enough as an arts and culture field? Do we listen enough from the edges? And how can we help kind of get the news from the edges out to the middle?
So often we hear in the field that if we're using art for any other purpose, the instrumental use of art, that's a bad thing, and it lessens the art, it lessens the artist, maybe even the organization. When we're thinking about creative placemaking, what I find so exciting, at least with this group of people, is there was no sense at all that involving the community in the culture, to use our terminology, but however you want to frame it, that's just an essential part of what they're doing. It's a critical part of what they're doing. It doesn't lessen what they're doing at all, and there's no discussion of whether that's a negative or detracts from their work. I think it's essential to the value of their work, and that was something that came through in all of the conversations that I had with people in the program and found very refreshing and exciting.
In the field, we often talk about how can we talk about our value? How can we communicate the value? And we talk about it in terms of, if we could only just find the way to describe what we're doing in a way that everyone will get it, and then they will support us, and then it'll be great. But these people, it's the value that they are, their value is self-evident, right?
Right.
It's not, they don't have to explain it necessarily. It's they know who they're for. they're solving some need, they're serving that community, and that community appreciates it because they're having a need met.
So what we heard from them was so different from what we often hear from people in the field that have a very strong vision of the role and the value of their work, which is understandable, but since they see the intrinsic value, that they think if they can just communicate to people in the right way or get the message through that their work is intrinsically valuable, that others will see it as they do, and then be perhaps entitled to public support or a certain amount of visitors, and often frustrated when that doesn't happen, and some of the culture at large doesn't share the value or see the value in their work. I think if you have to lobby or cajole or otherwise convince people of the value of your work, it's unlikely they're going to actually value it. I think you've lost the battle before you begin the fight.
Another contrast I've seen in working with Creative Community Fellows, as opposed to other experiences I've had, is the amount of diversity we had in the group of applicants and in the group that we selected, the group of 50. We hear a lot of conversations in the field about diversity, and for good reason. People of color are significantly underrepresented in our institutions, in our audiences, on boards. But for this recruitment process, the entire group of applicants was very, very diverse. And again, I think it comes back to reframing the question of who's in the field. These entrepreneurs who are going out on their own and making it happen, they're a legitimate part of this field, and there are a lot of backgrounds represented amongst this group. So I think it's important to include them. And I also think it's important to question what is happening with traditional institutions in job design, in the pipeline coming up for these jobs, in the network that we've formed, that is exclusive and is not including these really smart, driven, talented people. More and more, it's important to have a master's degree in arts management or an MBA to get these jobs, which are really competitive. And we have to wonder, what other experiences and expertise are valuable that people could be gaining from their own entrepreneurial work, that it's not possible for everybody to get an expensive master's degree. And what are we missing by only counting those people?
We're often tasked with doing more with less, and these folks definitely are experts at that. And it struck me the article that David Dower wrote in HowlRound about the scarcity matrix, and this, again, the idea of reframing everything about away from the idea that everything is scarce, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough resources. These people really see the work that they do, the art that they create, the need that they're filled. They see that as a resource, and they're very much about bringing that resource to bear. And I think if we put that to use within organizations, that could be an incredibly powerful thing.
If you think about the field as the arts institutions and the leaders of these long-standing institutions that have been there, well, then there are a lot of problems and real concerns. Audiences are dwindling, and donations are hard to come by, and there is a lot of competition. And it's not surprising that those are the main themes of a lot of the conversations in the field. But when you reframe it and you think about these entrepreneurs as a part of that field, suddenly it doesn't look so grim. I mean, they are out there, they're pursuing their passions, and they're fulfilling a real need, as you were talking about, Fielding, going out and finding a better way to make what they love happen in their communities. So everything they're doing is incredibly relevant. So if we reframe the field to include these entrepreneurs, it just becomes a lot more optimistic. So the real event is happening next week, when you'll be hearing from all of the fellows. They've been paired up, and they're talking to each other about their projects and their work thus far as entrepreneurs. We hope you will be just as excited to hear from these fellows as we have been throughout the past couple weeks. We wanted to share with you a few lessons that we learned from this experience thus far, and I hope those have been valuable to you. We also hope that you join in on the conversation, whether that be asking questions on the blog, adding your voice, sending in a blog submission, or just writing to us. We really hope that everybody joins in on this conversation.